100. The long-standing presence of Mexicanos on both sides of the border has resulted in specific cultural formations and the unique lived experiences of feeling split and divided. So the reason I like that sentence and I like that idea is that up until now, when we have talked about Latina studies or Latino studies, it's often been in the context of studying specific groups of people. So if you remember back in the day, we talked about Chicano studies or Mexican American studies, Puerto Rican studies, then we talked about Dominican studies, Central American studies, then a whole bunch of South American studies. And in all of those things, you'll notice that the named part is the country or the region. With border studies, what is, I think, most interesting about it or most helpful about it is you're not necessarily trying to study a specific group of people. And Mize uses the term essentializing, because you're not trying to say, okay, I'm trying to find some sort of commonality among Mexicans or among Mexican Americans, which often results in basically perpetuating either good or bad stereotypes about that group. When you're doing border studies, what it allows you to do is to study a region and to study the interactions in the region and to study people on either sides of this border who might identify as Mexican on either side of the border or who might identify as white on either side of the border, and their interactions among these groups. So it's potentially a very interesting research idea. A person who we've seen several times before from back in the day and was in the banned books collection, Gloria Anzaldúa, who I have claimed we cannot underestimate her influence, and we've seen her in terms of Latina feminism before. And as Mize says here, she is, what do you call her? Anzaldúa's insights often serve as the alpha and omega, which is like the beginning and end for border studies. Great sentence from her, which two of you latched onto. The U.S. Mexican border es una herida abierta, where the third world grates against the first and bleeds. Whew, that is beautiful. Jimena, what do you think? An open wound. Yes, bleeding. Grace, what do you think?
The same way, I thought it was very interesting how she said it bleeding.
Una herida abierta, an open wound where the third world grates against the first and bleeds. Now let's read on here. That's the quote. That's why you can tell. What a great author. You know, you can tell why it's, you know, that just has that language. We're not really sure what it means, but boy, it sure sounds good. This open wound they refer to as very much historically constructed in a lived contemporary reality. Profound inequalities persist along the border, even if the terminology of first and third world holds less resonance. I think what Mize is trying to say here, which he said in various parts before, is the idea that there's one first world on the US side of the border and one third world on the other side of the border is not exactly how things work. For anybody who knows what's going on now, there are all kinds of little parts of what we might call the third world in the first world and the first world in the third world. And there are people who are elites in Mexico making lots of money, and there are people in the United States who are not making any money at all. So the idea that there's just a divide between the first and third world is not necessarily as relevant. However, it is still this place of conjunction and separation where, well, let's just say that there's perhaps a lot of literal bleeding going on, just in kind of, you know, in fact, perhaps even more than when this book was written, in part because of the policies that try to push people off and use the desert region as a way of trying to push people into places where it would be very difficult to cross the border, has resulted in a huge amount of death and dying on the border as people try to come up through even more dangerous routes. So yeah, this is a very amazing metaphor, but is also in some ways a lived contemporary reality, as Mize says. Mize also here mentions the work of Josiah Heyman and some other anthropologists who've done some really interesting work along the border. One of you talked about one of the quotes from, I think it was on page 101 here. Let's see if I can get that one. Border as a metaphor is simply not the same as living on the border in local, concrete, daily experiences. So this is the idea that, you know, I mean, a lot of people have, I guess I would say that a lot of highfalutin scholars have come in and tried to use all these metaphors of border and identity. And that's why some of this is complicated to read. But the anthropologists, I think in general, have looked at sort of these, how people live and make their life in the daily experience of trying to cross and not cross this border. So trying to do that anthropological investigation of actually living and working with people. And then Marco chose a quote from page 104. I like this one too. The symbolic representation of the border as a wall or fence in need of further fortification only serves to place the problems associated with illegal immigration as a burden to those deemed illegal. Lost in the equation are the employers who are illegally employing workers without papers, consumers who benefit from cheap products and services, and politicians on both sides of the aisle who criminalize immigrants for their own political gain. What do you think, Marco?
Just that part, because I thought it was interesting that wrong people are being punished if they are caught over the border without papers, and if they are the individuals themselves are not like the people that brought them here to work, or like those corporations are using them, and they're not going to be like, punishment consequences for doing so. They just, the orders are just not back, and then they're like, oh,
right. Plus, I get to eat cheap strawberries. I mean, you know, I wouldn't even have strawberries. All kinds of farm crops, you know, so I don't have to pay. I don't have to worry. Yeah, I mean, where are the sanctions on the employers? You know, you militarize this. Yeah, no. Made you upset, right? Made you want to be a lawyer. Actually, yes, excellent. Keep prodding you on that for the rest of your time until you tell me not to. Yeah, very good sentence. Check it out. So, in the last few years, I don't know when this meme arose, but all of a sudden everybody started taking pictures of their cute kids with these signs, right? If you build a wall, because they're going to build a wall, my generation will knock it down. Isn't that cute? It just really makes you think that these little kids are going to change the world. And I don't want to knock the little kids. But I guess I would say there's not a whole lot of evidence that this is true. So this idea relies on another idea, which is that young people are more tolerant and open, and us old people are the ones that are sort of the bad, intolerant people. And I put that up there to sort of compare, contrast that with what Mize describes and his experience of working in this place where on one side of the border, they had this company that had a warehouse in San Diego, and they had to go over to do inventory in Tecate they did every 2 years, because why did they do it twice a year? They did it twice a year because the female Mexican workers, according to the full-timers, could not count. So the idea is you had to do inventory twice a year because those women on the other side can't count very well. And what Mize is saying here is that you had these Mexican Americans working in the warehouse, and basically they reinforced all the stereotypes about people who lived in Mexico, about Mexican women, about Mexico itself. That those stereotypes were being reinforced by the young male Mexican Americans. And so, I put that up there to say we can't count on just that the young people are going to be more tolerant. A lot of these ideas that we have, these stereotypes that we have, keep becoming perpetuated in the younger generation. And yes, we want to believe that education and the law can be used to diminish racism, but we have to be very careful about it. So yeah, I mean, we have to watch out for assumptions that everything is necessarily going to get better or worse.